There we go. Are we on voice activated or something here?
Hello.
Yeah. Okay, now we are not on voice activated.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. We're going to discuss story and our system for structuring it. The first item of note is that we look at story differently than it has been looked at in the past. Rather than looking at it as a series of people doing things and in the external world and interrelating, we look at all of those people and the things they do as being representative of the inner workings of a single human mind trying to deal with a dilemma. It's our contention that stories are enjoyable to us, that the reason we like to listen to them and watch them is because they show us an unfamiliar external view of the inner workings of our own minds. We can never really look at ourselves clearly because we always have to stand on one part to see the rest of it working inside ourselves. So what stories provide to us is that external view where we can more clearly see how to deal with problems, both problems of our mind and problems of the world around us, and gain some answers as to how to use them in our own life. Essentially, through thousands of years of storytelling, the reflection of that human mind has been refined into the art of story structure, and that there are certain conventions that keep cropping up over and over again, as well as certain things that will work and certain ones that won't work. We can see these both in a logical fashion at some level and also have an intuitive sense of it. The reason being that those things that accurately reflect the way the mind works are the ones that read right to us, both in terms of logic and feeling, and those that do not accurately reflect the mind, those seem to us like that's not quite working in that story or that screenplay. So the initial job is to take stories that we have all seen, sort of put them all together, look at the elements that keep recurring, and begin to try to discern a pattern from all that shows us how the mind is put together, and from that pattern see how to put stories together more efficiently with the greatest possible potential. Anything at this point?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. First of all, there are two domains we're interested in. One domain is the mind itself, and the other is the universe. For each of us, there is our internal self of which we are aware, and there is the external universe of which we are aware. We can have problems in either world. Either we can't come to grip with feelings or attitudes, or we can't work out a solution internally as to how we want to feel about something, or what we would like to be or become. Or we're faced with challenges from the outside world where the universe is not in the state we would like it to be, we would prefer something different, or perhaps it's working against a design that we have for altering the universe. We get a goal, we go out and try to achieve it, and something stands in our way. So a problem can exist in either world, but that's not what makes up a dilemma. What makes up a dilemma, and the true nature of the well-written story, is that there is a problem internally and a problem externally, and it is the relationship between these two problems that causes the dilemma. Going into more detail on that, how do we determine there's a problem in the universe or in the mind? We can't really take God's point of view and see those problems independently, because if we look at the universe, what could really be a problem without people in it, without our minds in it, to look at the universe and determine what we want and don't want? Things just happen. They just work according to the laws of physics. There can't be a problem in that independently of the mind. And similarly, if we're looking only at our mind and it's functioning internally, there cannot be a problem there either, because it will work according to the potentials of our minds, our motivations, the direction of our thoughts, the knowledge we've accumulated. It is only when the mind establishes a set and the universe establishes a set, and those two are incompatible, that a dilemma is created. And by creating that dilemma, the mind appears to have a problem from the point of view of the universe appears to have a problem from the point of view of the mind.
time.
Yes.
A different or expanded definition of that. Going back to the idea of story as being an exploded view of the mind interacting with the universe at a particular moment. If you could look at it from those two different views. If you look at it in terms of examining a specific mindset, then what you do is you create this static description of all the different things that make up the mind at a particular moment. Then you can see how that then relates to the universe and where there is a discrepancy between the two. At that point, you can explore all of the universe alternatives to see how that mindset works with those altering universe sets, the real world. So to hopefully find one that they are both compatible. If you've gone through all the different physical, environmental sets that you can think of, and there's still a discrepancy between the real world and this state of being of the mind, then what that is the true nature of a dilemma, because what that means is after you've tried changing everything in the physical world and there's still a problem or still a dilemma, then the only thing that can happen is that the mind itself must change. Likewise, if you have a problem in the physical universe that you wish to establish, you freeze the status of that, and then you go through all the different types of mindsets that would be applying to, different ways of looking at the real world from your mind by changing those points of view within your mind. Hopefully, trying to find one where you will have a compatible mindset and a compatible universe set. If you do not find those after you've gone through all the combinations of changing your mind, so to speak, then you too have a dilemma. And the idea is that you always want to equalize the state of being of the mind and the state of being of the world. So if you've gone through, you've got this fixed real world problem, the mind has gone through all the changes it can and still can't resolve it, then you must change, in that case, you must change the world to come in line with your mind. That was my little thing. Okay.
Good.
You next.
Okay, so essentially there's no real reason, and actually a great clouding of the issue, to try and keep the universe set and the mindset both floating. In reality, in our actuality in our universe and in our minds are always changing, and the universe is always changing. And we can never really accomplish a completely compatible state between the two, but we always try to optimize that state, or in other words, limit the inequity between the two to the best of our abilities. In story, we take a different approach. We simplify the issue by holding either mind or universe as a fixed set, because in truth, we can tell the nature of the inequity between mind and universe either by looking at it from the mind's perspective and seeing how the universe is different from it, or from the universe perspective and seeing how the mind is different from it. So all we have to do is pick one of those sets as the one in which we want to measure the inequity, and then explore the nature of the other set in relationship to the one that we have fixed, and that will give us as close and accurate estimation of the differences between the two as we can get. In conclusion, then, the universe and the mind are each independently operating systems that influence each other. And in and of themselves, neither one can experience a problem. It is only between the two where problems can be perceived. when we look from standing on one, we'll see the problem in the other one. And when we stand back and look at the relationship between the two of them, we can see the dilemma as the differential between them both.
And the last point being that quite often it's much easier to resolve the inequity by adjusting one than it is the other. It might be easier to resolve the inequity by adjusting the mind than changing the universe, or changing the universe than it is to change the mind.
Along that note, if we have a situation in the universe that you absolutely have made up your mind you want it a certain way, and it doesn't require much effort to make that change in your environment, you can affect that change rather easily unless a lot of obstacles get in your way. And there's absolutely no reason why you would want to change a very fixed mindset to accommodate a very mobile universe set. On the other hand, if you're trying to do something in the universe or your environment which is essentially immovable and unchangeable, then it doesn't matter how much you want it, it simply is not going to happen. And you're either going to have to live with that inequity between what you want and what the universe will let you have, or you have to change your mind about what you want and determine that you no longer want that for whatever reasons, including just that you find it impossible to actually accomplish your task. Later in story, we will see how we structure the universe and mind sets by creating a problem that is a work problem that must be solved in each set. That the mind will have something that must be accomplished, and the universe will have something that must be accomplished. And the key to accomplishing both of those problems will reside in changing the fixed set. The purpose of story is not to say how we do work, how we can go into the set that we're looking at as being changeable and move things around into a convenient pattern. Rather, the purpose of story is to say that when we fix anything and will not let it change, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Essentially, nothing can really be accomplished at all unless we are motivated to change it. And only by fixing a mindset of some sort can we be motivated. Only problems can exist in the environment when the universe refuses to budge, and only by fixing a universe set can we be forced into facing that those things may or may not be changeable. And so, when we create a story, we create a problem in the universe and a problem in the mind. Each one will be a problem apparent only from the other set, and the exploration of all the potentials between them will lead to a moment of decision when either one will be able to resolve both problems or one will not be able to resolve them.
But it's the incompatibility between that mindset and the current state of the universe, or the universe set and the current state of the mind, that is what needs to be resolved. And the fact that they are completely incompatible, that they cannot exist together, is what creates the dilemma, and the resolution is achieved by changing the one that is fixed, not the one that can be changed.
And so that's the nature of dilemma. One way of looking at it is that you want to have mind a certain way and you want to have universe another certain way, and that you cannot have both, because you must either, if the universe cannot change, you must change your mind, or if the mind will not change, you must change the universe. But if you find yourself at some point unable to change one or the other, to change either of them, you're faced with a discrepancy between the two that creates this inequity. And so, the way we deal with this inequity is, if we can't solve it right now, this dilemma, by saying we just don't want to change the universe anymore, or saying that we will find a way immediately to change the universe even though it's so far proven to be impossible to do so. If neither one of us will budge, mind or universe, and we have this dilemma, then there is only one option, and that is two options. That is, to live with the dilemma and suffer the knowledge that an inequity exists, or to put it out of our minds in the hope that later either the universe will change its nature or we will change ours and the dilemma will go away. That does not mean the inequity will go away necessarily, but it just means that over time our mind may not be as fixed as it was because of new information we have gotten or new experiences we have been through that alter how much we wish to remain fixed in that attitude or in that desire for a certain goal. Or the universe is constantly evolving over time and may change itself so that new things come into the picture, or the forces that were working against us become diminished or rearranged over time, and with our remaining mind still fixed, we may find the opposition to our completion of our task in the universe an easier thing than it was before, something that can actually be accomplished. So when we're faced with a true dilemma, one in which neither universe nor mind will budge, we either have to live with that inequity and consciously consider it continually, or we put it out of our minds to buy time and hope that something will change so the dilemma works itself out.
But what happens in a story is that you limit either the time that you have to consider it, which means that you now have to make a decision because you cannot keep on putting it off, or you limit the space in which you have to consider it or to do it, so that it must be done within these certain confines. And once you get to the limits of those confines, something has to be done.
Now, remembering that story is about a single human mind, not about a whole bunch of characters, but a single human mind with a single dilemma, and that all the characters represent aspects of that mind, and all that they do represent aspects of that mind. We then have a primary character, and the primary character is the one whose internal makeup is exactly the makeup of the mindset that we are looking at for the story as a whole. And we do still have some tape left. Okay. All right. So, when this particular character has been faced with a dilemma that he cannot solve, what does he do about it? Well, if he faces the problem continually and reconsiders it, and nothing is changing, essentially he's taking very valuable space in his consciousness to consider something that is not altering, and the considerations will bring him no closer to solving the problem than not considering it. This essentially is a waste of space and leads to a poor survival trait. If it were possible to take that knowledge of the inequity and force it down where the conscious mind cannot even see it, then the conscious mind can be freed to deal with the problems that come up here and there throughout life and not have to worry about that inequity in order to let time pass and see if that dilemma will resolve itself. The human mind is made up of essentially 4 different aspects in a very generic or broad sense. One of them would be the conscious mind, where your self-awareness is, where you try to make decisions as to how to change the way you feel or as how to act to change the universe. It is kind of the clearinghouse where observation comes in from the outside and your own motivations come up from the inside, and you play the two against each other to determine if there is incompatibility, and if so, which of those two things, if not both, to try to change. In order to understand what your real motivations are, you must call upon your memory, and your memory tells you how you have felt in the past, what your motivations were. It also tells you what the expectations are that you have determined in the past for the universe and for your environment and what you would like it to be. And in a very broad sense, then, you have a pre-consciousness, which essentially is, in this sense, akin to the observation of the universe, so that you look at your environment. Your sensory perceptions bring you a picture of the universe in the preconscious. It is a flash photograph, a frozen moment that says, here's the way things are around you. And at the same time, the conscious also calls up a flash photograph of memory, saying, this is the way that I have determined previously I want it to be. And the two of those are compared, and an equity is sought. And if they are in balance, if there is no discrepancy between the two, the consciousness will continue to wait for the signs of an inequity somewhere. As long as there is no inequity, there is no need for action, either to change self or to change universe. If the two do not match, and for some reason the environment is different than the mindset, then the consciousness must make a decision as to whether to try and alter the mind or whether to try and alter the universe as seen through the observation in what we call the preconscious. That will be the first attempt, is to alter one or the other. And if you alter one and you fail at altering that and resolving the inequity, you will then try to alter the other. And if you all try to alter that and fail to resolve the inequity or make a change that will resolve that inequity, then you are stuck with a dilemma. That is the point at which you will, for efficiency and practical and survival benefits, take that dilemma, which cannot be resolved, and determine if there is the possibility that that dilemma might change with time. Now, if there is no possibility it will change with time, you will simply flip a coin and make a decision, because there is no expectation that anything's going to get any better. There's no way that you can anticipate even things you don't know coming into the picture and altering that, and so you'll simply make it on the basis of chance or happenstance. But if you perceive even the slightest possibility that that dilemma may be resolved by itself in time, or at least made into a choice that the consciousness can handle by determining which is more important to preserve, the mindset or the universe set. In other words, to unbalance them so this inequity between the two has an obvious resolution, a decidable resolution. If that is expected to occur as even possibly occurring, then the consciousness will throw it down into the subconscious, throw down that inequity into the unreachable area of the mind for the consciousness. Consciousness can look at observation in the preconscious, and it can look at memory, but it cannot look directly into the subconscious. That is the blind side to the mind, the side that cannot be directly manipulated. So if an observation comes in from preconscious into the conscious, which calls up memory and compares the two, if it's anticipated that waiting on a decision will resolve a dilemma that exists, it will then move into the final position of the subconscious and create there what we call a balanced inequity. What is a balanced inequity? That is when the subconscious makes almost a mirror image, a complementary inequity within the basic workings of the mind that filter the pre-consciousness or filter the observation coming in from the environment, so that the inequity is no longer visible because the subconscious is either added to that observation or deducted from it those items which created the apparent inequity to begin with. As long as the subconscious then holds on to that filter that's been created to match that particular problem, and as long as the nature of the problem itself does not change, it becomes essentially invisible to the conscious mind, is no longer considered and no longer seen. Again, the functionality is that it frees the conscious mind to deal with the thousands of other decisions it must make, so that it does not have to have that problem taking up space where it prevents us from being as efficient as we can in all other areas of our life. As long as the surrounding universe does not create a new problem that forces us to see that inequity again, or that the inequity itself changes its nature so that we're forced to see it again, or through all the other thoughts that we have and observations we have cause us to see the inequity in our own minds. As long as that remains in a balanced state, that particular dilemma will no longer be visible to the mind. That is generally called the backstory of the primary character, where he works his way from seeing a problem, deciding to delay a problem, building up balanced inequity in his subconscious, and having the problem become invisible to him. And he remains in that state in a complementary environment that does not force him to reevaluate the nature of the original dilemma or to become aware of it. And he sits there with that built-in potential in his mind, essentially false information created to mirror or counter the observation that leads him to be aware of that dilemma. He has that unbalance within himself just waiting as a potential, like a book placed on a shelf waiting to fall from the force of gravity. And all it takes is something to knock it out of alignment, and the process of unraveling that from subconscious to memory to conscious back to preconscious will begin. What at this point?
Okay, this is just random conversation, random thoughts about the stuff that Melanie was just talking about. One of the things that's important to note is that how things actually work in the mind is different than how we see them work or how we think that they work. For instance, it's important to go back in order to resolve an inequity. It's truly important to go back and remove that initial filter, which is the blinder to the observation, the actuality of the observation that was built up because of our balanced inequity in the subconscious. However, even though that appears to be the last step from an external real-world view, the way that some people, left-minded people, I think, me, see that is a bit differently. I do not see that filter, the removal of the filter, is the last step before one can resolve the inequity. I see that actually as a second step, as that is the breaking down of that preconscious filter is the step by which that creates the greatest resistance to my understanding of the world, and that my conscious thoughts are actually the result, that understanding how I'm consciously thinking is really what it comes down to before I can resolve my problem. It has to come to my consciousness in order for me to be able to resolve a problem that exists within myself.
Okay, this is an important point to bring up here, is that in our work with story, as in our work with mental relativity, we have discovered that there are two basic different outlooks, or two basic different minds. And these seem to be biologically cast at birth. You are either one or you are the other. And although you can counter it, you can learn to temper it, you will either have one viewpoint or the other. So much of the material that we'll be going through will read better for half the population than the other half. Story has found a common ground between those two. And again, this was marvelous to think of, that this has happened empirically, is that by having audiences of both left-minded, as we call them, and right-minded individuals, that in order to reach the broadest audience, a system needed to be created where everything made sense to each viewpoint. The difference is that the things that happen in a story, what the characters do and who they are, may look different to the right and the left-minded, but they will both make sense as being believable. Essentially, a lot of the material in a story may look like it's something that people relate to internally as something that they would do, they themselves, whereas the other half, the left or right mind, the other half, would look at it as something that they have seen other people do externally. The remaining portion of material would feel like it was internal to the other mindset, but external to the original mindset, and rather than feeling that one inside, they would look at it as being something they have seen other people do. So the nature of stories as to who is going to be empathizing with the character, who is going to be sympathizing with that same character, is determined by those mindsets. And as we go through, the orders that we suggest of things are not necessarily the only order that will work. It's just an order we have selected for conventional purposes in order to have at least one consistent set that shows